Book 1, Law of Salimi, Chapter 45, titled Respondent001. I do not wish to expose the true identity of Respondent001 because it might be used or judged unfairly and unjustly by others based on my depiction or my perspective on him. In fact, who Respondent001 really was in real life was not paramount in playing his role in my life story. To me, what was important was his traits and attributes that he had presented to me and showed me how he had walked his own path of a scholar, which had led him to where he was as a well-known professor at the university and numerous other places all over the world. Without uncovering his real name or true identity, he was, and still is, one of the best scholars that I had ever seen in my life, who was truly grounded based on the teachings of Islam. In other words, his life was quintessence example of Islam as a way of life, specifically the concept of practicing moderation living. While most of other professors seemed to be donning the most expensive gadgets, drove an extravagant supercar, or live in a huge mansion, Respondent001 does not do any of that. He drove an old Honda Civic, which I assume the car model to be around the age of 20 years old. He does not focus his life towards materialism and hedonism. In fact, he solemnly practiced Islam as a way of life. As my supervisor at the university, he guided me to understand the knowledge of Islamic banking using a method which I described to be as old school. It was definitely unique when compared to my other classmates or anyone that I knew doing PhD program. Instead of pointing me exactly where I need to go and do, he let me find my own path and report my progress. An analogy to describe my journey to gain knowledge was like I was on a boat and Respondent001 pushed me towards the vast space of the ocean in the hope of finding my own way on my own effort. This method was perceived by me to be the old school method. He left me to be lost in the vast space of knowledge to discover my own path and learn to navigate myself into the right path towards the right destination. This method was a double-edged sword. While it allowed me the truest sense of freedom to indulge myself in all forms of knowledge, which I was extremely grateful about because of my passion of knowledge, it was also very time-consuming. It allowed me to acquire a vast amount of knowledge without limitation. In my first and second semester, I was still lost in the limitless space of knowledge, which allowed me to learn a massive amount of knowledge over the period of 1 year. In my third semester, in my third semester, I began to understand most of the things that Respondent001 spoke about and discussed with me as well as with other professors, which indicated that this method had vastly improved my understanding, learning, and knowledge about the subject matter of my research. By the time I presented my proposal defense paper, I was referring about 500 books and digital references, while most of my other PhD candidates were applying about 20 references. I guess that Respondent001 saw my abilities and talents, which made him choose to implement the old school method of finding my own path in the journey towards completing my PhD thesis. By the fourth semester or the second year, I managed to complete all of my required 8 subjects and pass them according to my PhD requirements. I loved the freedom to learn on my own pace, which was given to me by Respondent001 because I managed to widen my focus of study towards numerous other fields of study such as understanding of Islam, knowledge of other scholars, psychology, social science, historical background study, and many other complementary knowledge which augmented the learning for the field of Islamic banking. On the second year of the university, during the time of July 2010, I had finally reached the level of understanding to truly comprehend every discussion and concept explained and explored by Respondent001. I had finally decided to pursue a specialization for my thesis, which was extension of the research that was currently conducted by Respondent001. It was to perform a study of perception on Islamic banking system in Malaysia. Basically speaking, my research seeks to understand how Malaysians perceived Islamic banking system or IBS in Malaysia. The research were conducted based on vast amount of references which were validated with face-to-face interviews with the experts and scholars of Islamic banking system in Malaysia. Essentially, the thesis utilized the qualitative method where every interviews were recorded and analyzed to derive the conclusion for my thesis. At this stage of my research, I began to study more about philosophical concepts presented about perception and how people see things in this world, especially from the book written by Andrew Sayer and many other authors. In short, my research was very different from most of my other colleagues or PhD candidates at the university. I had always described the nature of my research was analogous to the action of swimming against the current. It became very adventurous and extremely challenging since almost everyone that was interviewed during the data collection process of my thesis seemed to be presenting some degree of unwillingness to participate, considering the research was rather sensitive in nature. As a result, many interviewee candidates refused to participate in this research, possibly due to the sensitivity nature of the research. Notwithstanding, I managed to conduct several preliminary interviews with the public to assess their perception about Islamic banking system or IBS in Malaysia as a customer of banking services. In general, most of the people interviewed seemed to indicate that they were lacking of knowledge about Islamic banking system in Malaysia. In addition, it seemed that they had less motivation and effort to begin on studying further about Islamic banking system, considering of their time limitation in their life. As such, it was concluded that most consumers of banking services in Malaysia do not truly comprehend the fundamental theories practiced by Islamic banking system in Malaysia. One of the most significant concerns for consumers interviewed in this research was whether a particular bank was halal or permitted or haram, which is prohibited according to Islam. These had suggested that the consumers were concerned about the permissibility of the products by Islamic banks based on the teachings of Islam and Sharia rulings and regulation. In effect, it indicated that consumers wished to learn which bank were offering a permissible product according to Islam because they do not wish to be involved in prohibited practices as far as banking services were concerned. The interviews done with numerous consumers of Islamic banking system in Malaysia had highlighted that my thesis was uncovering significant issues amongst the perception of consumers about the permissibility of banking product offered to them. In essence, the public were concerned that Islamic banking system in Malaysia should remove the practice of riba or usury from their products. This is one of the sessions that has been done to gauge the understanding of the public. And during the interview session, digital voice recording apparatus was used and notes were taken by writing down important issues on my notes pad. In addition, the interviews were conducted without a specific set of questions, but guided by the goals of the research. It means every interviews were very flexible and adaptable according to the level of knowledge of respondents interviewed, as well as adjusted based on their own specific specialization and expertise. In effect, I had managed to interview about 20 respondents who were consumers of banking services using one-to-one method, while a few hundreds of respondents were interviewed using group focus method. After the preliminary preparations were made, my thesis began to move forward for interviews focused on the expertise and scholars who were practitioners in the field of Islamic banking industry in Malaysia. With that, it concluded the chapter 45, and I hope to see you again in the next video. Thank you very much for listening. See you soon.